It's time for us all to join together to create the world of our dreams. Welcome to Wellness World Radio, a co-creative radio show that allows humanity to focus its mind and intention on creating a better world. This show features wellness news, ideas, innovations, and music provided by our listeners and patrons worldwide. Good day, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Wellness World Radio. This is your host, Mindful Suzette, and on today's show, we will find out what Meta-Psychiatry is and the growing popular culture of spirituality with psychiatrist Manuel Matas, author of Blood and the Dominion, a psychiatrist's journey to the spooky side of life. According to pewresearch.org, recent surveys are indicating that the overall American public appears to be growing, quote-unquote, a bit less religious, but also somewhat more spiritual. This increase in spirituality may also be why more and more people are having increased spiritual experiences as well. Some of these include out-of-body experiences, sightings of deceased ones after death, and assistance by guardian angels. In fact, according to Time.com, a new study by the Baylor University Institute found that more than half of all Americans believe that in the course of their lives they have been helped by a guardian angel. That is more than 50%, folks, which means that it is way more normal than not. And yet, in psychiatry, if you say you saw an angel or a ghost, you will probably be heavily medicated for sharing that statement. But how does a psychiatrist know what is real or not? According to science, there are 6 dimensions that we cannot normally perceive with the naked eye, and no one knows yet what these dimensions are. The great news is that meta-psychiatry is on the rise, as the increase in spirituality indicates a changing new popular culture. I was fortunate enough to bump into Meta-Psychiatrist Manuel Matas at the International Conference of the Institute of Integral Human Sciences and Spiritual Science Fellowship of Canada. Here is what he had to say on the topic. I hear that you're a psychiatrist who focuses on meta-psychiatry. Can you tell us what this new type of psychiatry is?
This is a type of psychiatry that blends psychiatry with metaphysics and spirituality. The word meta in Greek means beyond. So you could say meta-psychiatry goes beyond traditional psychiatry.
Do you use this with your clients in practice?
No, I don't. I'm more of a traditional psychiatrist when it comes to working with patients. I worked as a physician for 42 years, and then at age 65, I decided because of my health and because I wanted to pursue other interests, I decided to retire.
And you decided to write a book.
Yes.
What is the title of your new book?
The book is called Blood and the Dominion, a psychiatrist's journey to the spooky side of life.
Wow. How interesting. I
Yes.
love that title.
Thank you.
I love that title.
Thank you.
What brought you to write this book?
Well, it was mostly based on my own experiences, which I wanted to share with people. I found that generally when people have experiences which are outside of the normal range of experience, for example, if someone sees a vision or if someone has an experience which they can't explain rationally, they might be afraid to tell people about it for fear that people would think they're somehow weird or abnormal or crazy or, as they say, woo-woo, But I wanted people to know that it's very common to have these so-called paranormal or spiritual or metaphysical type of experiences, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's okay. It doesn't make you crazy. A lot of people have these experiences, and they're actually, in my opinion, quite normal. It's just, as I say, people traditionally have been afraid to talk about these experiences, even with their own doctors or with their own closest friends, because they're afraid other people will judge them. So I thought if I could talk about some of my own experiences, I could help to normalize the experience. so people would feel more free to talk about their own experiences.
And I also hear that the percentage of people who have these type of experiences is much larger than what we would expect.
That's correct. In fact, there was one study done at Duke University where 20% of students said they had had an out-of-body experience.
20%?
Yes, which is...
Out-of-body experience?
Yes, which is quite a high percentage. And I actually had an out-of-body experience myself. But at the time, I didn't know what it was. I had never heard about it. I had never read about it. I didn't know anyone who had one. I didn't really know what to make of it. So these types of experiences are what caused me to start to do research on the subject, including near-death experience, out-of-body experience, even what's called after-death communication, communication with the spirit world, this type of thing.
Wonderful. This is really leading edge research that you're doing and that you're presenting in this new book, which I think people are going to find really liberating, would be the right word to choose.
Thank you. I certainly hope so.
At the International Scientific and Spiritual Conference in Montreal on Cosmic Creation and Unity, you spoke about the psycho-spirituality of everyday life. What does that mean?
Well, the title, The Psycho-Spirituality of Everyday Life, is actually a reference to a book written by Freud over 100 years ago called The Psychopathology of Everyday Life. So my intention is to focus on spirituality rather than on pathology. Now, in his book, Freud showed how the unconscious material can intrude and make itself known into conscious awareness through what were called Freudian slips or slips of the tongue. Similarly, with my work, I'm trying to show how spirituality can make itself known and intrude into our conscious awareness through various techniques that I've talked about in my presentation.
And in your presentation, I attended your presentation and I found so many things. You talk about popular culture and how spirituality has changed over time. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Well, I mentioned how popular culture can be expressed in a lot of different ways, including music, books, television, movies, theater, fashion, and so on. And then I give examples from each one of those. I also mentioned that it's what I call the red car phenomenon, which is that we don't really notice something until we make an effort to pay attention to it. And I used as an example, a friend of mine once said to me, "Did you ever notice how many red cars there are on the road?" And I said, "Well, no, I actually never did." But then when I started paying attention, I was astounded. There were so many red cars, and I had never even noticed before. So it was the same thing when people start to look for the presence of spirituality in the music they're listening to, or in the movies they're watching, or the books they're reading, or the plays they're attending. They would be surprised how much spirituality there is being expressed in the popular culture.
Yes, I was very surprised when you started naming, and playing some of the songs for us, and how many popular songs out there actually relate to spirituality.
It doesn't have to be the whole song. It doesn't have to be every word in the song. It could just be one line in the song. Or it could not even be the words. It could be the music. Or it could be the feeling that the song evokes in a person. And I gave some examples of songs. For example, the song, which you may be familiar with, called "He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother," which carries a universal message, I think. And I think most people can relate to it on an emotional level. And I said that the spirituality is sometimes expressed in very surprising ways. And I talked about the song "Grease" from the movie Grease, which I've heard so many times, but I never really listened to the words. But the other day when I was in my car listening to my car radio, the song "Grease" came on the radio, and I was surprised to hear the line, "This is a life of illusion." And that's actually a line in the song "Grease," and most people aren't aware of that.
No, absolutely. I wasn't aware of it until you mentioned it, actually.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we start to see that there's some spiritual connotations in music. And would you say that sometimes that's why it touches people so deeply?
Definitely. I think if music is effective, and in order to be popular, a lot of people have to like it. It has to evoke a reaction in a lot of people, not just one or two, which is often an emotional and spiritual one.
After the Wellness World News, we will return to psychiatrist Manuel Matas on how the growing presence of spirituality has been affecting pop culture. For those interested in finding out more on his upcoming book, you can contact him at bloodinthedominion@gmail.com. But first, let's focus our mind on solutions for a better world, with some environmental news about what is new out there that can truly green our planet. Something from our listeners. Two people have sent in information on ZipGrow, Robert Muller from Wakefield, Quebec, and Dan Lacroix from Guelph, Ontario, and we've combined the wonderful information to give you the latest news on how kale is now growing in the Arctic, inside an igloo greenhouse, and is inspiring the production of fresh food in the north. After nearly 3 years of work, Ben Canning, a 21-year-old Ryan University student, harvested the first crop from an innovative greenhouse built right on the Arctic Circle, an igloo-shaped structure that he envisions will be the first of many in northern communities. ZipGrow hydroponic towers from a Canadian company used for creating hydroponic farms were used to create the greenhouse, the goal being to reduce the cost of fresh food in the north. Many northern communities require fresh vegetables and fruit to be flown in at great expense. Often, they triple the price of what is offered in more southern Canadian cities. This greenhouse combines passive solar design and hydroponics to overcome harsh northern conditions and is scaled to serve about 1,000 people. When you enter the igloo, you will see reflectors that capture warmth from the sun and is stored in a large black tub of water that heats the greenhouse. What is most amazing is that it requires only 3 to 4 hours of sunlight to maintain the correct temperature. This growing system can maintain the necessary temperature and conditions for plant growth 7 months a year. This is huge considering temperatures outside can dip to near freezing even in summer. The article from cbc.ca stated that Maria Fraser, a nurse in the hamlet, has high hopes for the project and added the following comment. Nutritionally, it's going to be a big benefit to the children, the pregnant women, and of course the adults. Local fish and game are staples, but should be supplemented with fruits and vegetables, the kinds of food Southerners often take for granted. Now imagine a world where everyone can grow their own fresh organic food, no matter what type of climate you live in. Every household is garnished with hydroponic or aeroponic systems, where you can harvest a few veggies anytime you need, at very little cost, time, and energy. If you want to find out more on the subject, contact me at Suzette@wellnesslearning.ca, and it will be my pleasure to help make this dream come true for you. Back to today's interview with psychiatrist Manuel Matas on how the growing presence of spirituality has been affecting pop culture. You mentioned also certain studies that demonstrates that there's a certain percentage, I don't know if it was 45 years ago or whichever, and
Right.
that nowadays in 2015 there's been a conscious evolution, and we can actually see that conscious evolution in the percentages.
Mm-hmm. Well, I happened to come across a list of the top 40 songs in Canada in the year 1960. And then I compared it to the Grammys, which were shown in the year 2015, so 55 years later. And I mentioned how almost every singer who was performing at the Grammys sang a song with either some spiritual connotation, spiritual lyrics, or how they talked something like after the performance, how they said something that would be considered spiritual.
And also you addressed not only music, but movies and television.
Right, and books too.
Can you give us a few examples of the movies and television series?
Well, for example, in movies, there's a movie called The Sixth Sense about a boy. The tagline was, "I see dead people." So this is about a boy who sees ghosts. That movie was extremely popular around the world, and it made almost $1 billion at the box office. There is another movie called Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg, and she won an Academy Award for playing the role of a medium. And in fact, almost every genre, whether it's horror or drama or romance or comedy, almost every genre has examples of movies that could be considered spiritual.
And there's TV series that are now, I've started noticing it myself.
That's right.
Like there's Medium out there.
That's right.
There's a few other TV series. So maybe you can name a few popular TV series.
Well, there was Touched by an Angel. There's another show called Supernatural. There was Saving Hope. There was a movie Ghostbusters, which was a comedy. But there's also movies on TV that are intended for skeptics who are trying to debunk anything to do with the paranormal or with spirituality. The other thing, there's a number of mediums that have their own TV shows now. There's Long Island Medium, Teresa Caputo. I don't know if you've seen that. It's very
No, I haven't seen that one.
It's very interesting. It's on TLC, the Learning Channel.
Wonderful that this is all coming to the surface, as we say. As we see a conscious evolution in humanity, there's more and more of these shows that are becoming popular. And it's really the mass population creating the demand, I would believe.
That's right. Well, there's also a Canadian show called My Mum's a Medium, which is also very interesting. It's very good. And in my talk, I mentioned the proverb Vox Populi Vox Dei, which is a Latin phrase, which means the voice of the people is the voice of God.
Beautiful.
So the idea being that if we each have a divine spark or a creative spark, then we can express our spirituality or our godliness through our popular culture.
I think that's wonderful, and that gives also a lot of hope for our youth, because popular culture is something that's, I think, evolving with time. Right. And we also have different books and magazines. How would you say that these books, are there more numbers now?
Oh, definitely. These books are feeding a need. There seems to be a hunger in the land for spiritual knowledge. And books such as Chicken Soup for the Soul, which now has more than 250 titles in this series, has become the best-selling nonfiction book series in publishing history.
Wow.
Now, the interesting thing is that the author, Jack Canfield, when he wrote the first book in this series, which was called Chicken Soup for the Soul, had a really hard time finding a publisher. He was turned down 144 times before he found a small publisher in Florida that was willing to take a chance on him.
Wow, well, that's great for anyone who wants to publish a book to actually hear that he had to be turned down 144 times.
So you really need to persevere. And the other person, of course, Eckhart Tolle, he was sleeping on a park bench in Vancouver when he wrote and self-published his book, The Power of Now, which, again, sold millions of copies, and he became an international spiritual leader. He is considered one of the top spiritual leaders in the world at the present time. But he was very down and out at one time. And a lot of these writers of spiritual books have gone through a period of time when they were very poor, they were very lonely, they didn't have anyone to turn to except their own resources. And that seems to be a common theme in a lot of these authors who write spiritual books.
How can this increase in spirituality in our movies, TV, books, how can this help and assist our lives?
Well, the way that spirituality can help us is once we become aware of the pervasiveness of spirituality, it can, in fact, lift our mood, it can elevate our thoughts, and it can help us feel like we're a part of a community, a spiritual community. It gives us a sense of belonging and a feeling that we're not alone. Also in my talk, I referred to a study that was done by a researcher, a psychologist called Lisa Miller at Columbia University. And even though, as I said, you can't really measure spirituality, but she was able to determine the outcome for spiritually oriented teens versus non-spiritually oriented teens. And she found that the teens who had a spiritual orientation were much less likely to abuse substances, less likely to suffer from depression, and less likely to have unprotected sex. And she also said they did better academically. So there was a concrete benefit for these young people to have a spiritual basis. And she defined that as having a transcendental sense of your higher power, whether that is nature or God or the universe or whatever your belief system is, but somehow feeling that you are a part of something that's larger than yourself.
That's beautiful. And I think that's wonderful for the youth of our day to hear this, and also for parents out there to be encouraging youth to explore their spirituality more, and how this can also help them with their lives in general.
Right. And I also think it's probably worth saying that spirituality is a very broad term, and maybe some people don't even relate to that term or don't even know what it means. But I think, if we're talking about youth, it'd certainly be helpful for parents to have a conversation with their children to explore what that actually means and what it means to them.
That's a wonderful suggestion. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for meeting with us today. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you. It was a pleasure for me too.
That was psychiatrist Manuel Matas, author of Blood and the Dominion, A Psychiatrist's Journey to the Spooky Side of Life. To find out more about him and his upcoming book, you can go to bloodandthedominion@gmail.com. Thank you so much to everyone for listening in today, for adding your energy to co-creating a new world vision for humanity. If you wish to help co-create a better world, or would like to simply support this co-creative endeavor, go to patreon.com/wellnessworldradio. Your contribution is what makes this co-creative show possible. Thank you so much to everyone for your support.